G'day and welcome to the Seacreatures Podcast, a show all about the amazing animals that live beneath the waves. Each episode we chat about a specific sea creature with a guest who has spent time and interacted with this ocean animal. Our guests range from marine biologists to underwater photographers, citizen scientists, scuba divers, and anyone with an intense passion for marine life. My name's Matt Testoni, and I'm all of the above. And joining me for this episode of the Seacreatures Podcast is Habitat Restoration Coordinator Quinn McHerron. And we're going to be talking all about the amazing world of the horseshoe crab. Welcome to the show.
Thanks for having me, Matt.
No worries. So before we talk about this amazing animal, which I was so keen to learn about, tell us how you kind of got involved in horseshoe crab research and how you became to like them so much.
So, I've always had a passion for the coastal environment, and I got my undergraduate degree in marine science. I never thought I'd be working with horseshoe crabs, but I started working with a nonprofit called the American Littoral Society. And for those of you that don't know, littoral is just a fancy word for shoreline or coast. And we are a nonprofit that focuses on conservation, education, and advocacy for the coast. And my work with horseshoe crabs began shortly after Hurricane Sandy in 2012. So I'm located in New Jersey in the United States. And this hurricane back in October of 2012 came through and decimated a lot of our beach and coastal habitats. And one of those habitats was the Delaware Bay, which is a critical place for horseshoe crabs and shorebirds. And so doing habitat restoration really got me focused more into horseshoe crabs.
Awesome. Cool. And for the record, this is embarrassing, but I didn't actually know what littoral meant. So
many people don't.
You got me as well there. I actually had no idea really what a horseshoe crab was before doing a bit of research for this show, so it's super exciting. So I reckon there might be a few others listening that also have no idea, especially if we're not from an area where you find them naturally. So tell us exactly what a horseshoe crab is and kind of describe them. I describe them as looking like a bit like a vacuum cleaner, but I'm sure you have a better way of saying it.
So horseshoe crabs, although we use the word crab, they're actually not crabs at all. They're more closely related to spiders and scorpions, actually. And they're most closely related to trilobites that existed like 544 million years ago. So there are 4 species of horseshoe crabs in the world. The one that I work with is the American horseshoe crab, Limulus polyphemus. There are 3 other species that can be found in Asia. And they all look pretty similar. There is some slight differences, but my expertise is more on the Limulus polyphemus horseshoe crab. But yeah, I mean, they're kind of scary looking, especially if you haven't really seen one before. A lot of people refer to them as like face huggers from Alien. That's like a common reference that we get. But yeah, I mean, they have this hard exterior, and there's like 3 sections to the crab. And then underneath, they have a bunch of legs. And so they kind of look like a crab, but yeah, they're not a crab at all.
Yeah, and so yeah, they've got that hard outer shell. And when you look at them from the top, they do just look like almost like a robot in a way. Like they've got a round circular kind of like that vacuumy head and then a long tail.
Yeah.
It's quite an unusual creature, isn't it?
It really is.
As we talk about them, I have to ask too, I saw that they have some weird visual properties and eyesight kind of things. Can you tell us a little bit more about their eyesight and their visuals?
Absolutely. Yeah. So horseshoe crabs have 10 eyes, which always seems to amaze people. And 2 of the eyes you can see, pretty clearly. And those are the compound eyes. And they use those eyes to see light and images, very similar to the way that we see light in images. In fact, scientists have actually learned a bit about human eyes by studying horseshoe crab compound eyes. The other eyes are more primitive and they're more like photoreceptors than true eyes. And one cool thing about horseshoe crab eyes is that they can see UV light.
And so also describe for us like how big a horseshoe crab is and then where you would find them typically.
So, horseshoe crabs range in size, when they're eggs and they're getting ready to hatch. I mean, they sit like on the tip of your finger. They're really tiny. And, the adult horseshoe crabs, they also kind of range in size. The females are larger than the males. And they also kind of range in size. But the biggest horseshoe crab I think I ever found, I was able to like hold it across my chest. Kind of range in size a bit.
Yeah, so that's a pretty big marine animal, like to just find crawling around, especially on the beach, which is where you often see them. But they live on the beach sometimes. But talk us through like what their habitat is and how it changes.
Depending on the stage of their life, horseshoe crabs require different habitats. So as adults, when horseshoe crabs are fully grown and sexually mature, that's when they come up onto the beaches to spawn and lay eggs. And so they prefer, sandy beaches and bays and coves that have like a medium grain sand. They want that sand to be porous and well oxygenated, so that way there's proper egg development. And we often find them in these bays and coves because it's a little bit more protected. There's not as much wave energy. But when the eggs hatch, the crabs will spend the first 2 years of their life in the shallow waters of bays and in the intertidal flats and intertidal areas. And then as they age, they tend to move out a little bit further into deeper water. So, and then when they become full adults, they'll start migrating out to the continental shelf. When they come up to spawn, for us here in New Jersey, that's about May and June. And what triggers horseshoe crabs to come up and spawn is actually the water temperature.
Yeah, so they migrate to the continental shelf, and then they come back when the sea temperature rises. And I'm keen to talk about that a bit later, but I want to know, how far is the continental shelf from where they typically are? How far are these crabs going?
Yeah, so it all kind of depends on where along the Atlantic coast you are for how far they travel. But from New Jersey, the continental shelf is about 150 kilometers off of the coast of New Jersey, and then it extends down to about 160 meters. What's really cool about horseshoe crab movement from the beaches out to the continental shelf is they walk most of that journey. They don't they swim sometimes, but they're not the greatest swimmers. So most of the time they're just walking back out to the continental shelf. And
I have to ask, so I often read different facts and I kind of investigate if they're true or not. But I read that horseshoe crabs swim upside down. Is that true, or is that just a funny internet fact?
No, that is true. So they actually use their book gills. It's also how they breathe, but they flutter those gills underwater and it helps propel themselves forward. But they really don't swim quite as often. But yeah, when they do swim upside down.
And then they use their tail to right themselves if they land upside down because they got that cone kind of body. Is that right?
Yeah, they do. So, often people think that the tail is used to sting you, and that's not true at all. It's not a defense mechanism. They use their tail to right themselves. So when there's really rough water on the beaches, horseshoe crabs will stick their tail down into the sand to right themselves back over. And it's really important that they do that because one of the, natural mortalities of horseshoe crabs is when they are flipped upside down, their gills, which have to stay wet, they'll start to dry out in the sun. And sometimes gulls and other birds will start to peck at the gills as well. So yeah, it's really important that they have a fully intact tail to right themselves back over.
Yeah, such a cool adaptation for a tail, I reckon. I'm talking a lot about movement, but that's also because a lot of your research, you've actually been tagging these crabs. Talk us through how you tag a horseshoe crab and then what you do with the data and how it's important.
Sure. So the Littoral Society has been tagging horseshoe crabs since 2014, and this is part of a larger program with the U.S. Fish and Wildlife Service. So they have a cooperative tagging program that we're a part of. So we invite volunteers to come out on the beaches with us, and we start the night, so part of it is research for us, but a big part of it is outreach. We want to connect as many people as possible to horseshoe crabs, to the work that the Littoral Society is doing, to the significance of horseshoe crabs, and just having them, get that field experience and data collection experience that, we're getting. So, we start the night off with that talk, and then we'll teach volunteers how to tag. And the way that you tag horseshoe crabs is, we have a handheld drill. It's called a pin vise. And we cut a small hole into the back left fin of the horseshoe crab. That's the term for this back left corner of the crab. on the front part, the prosoma. And once you cut a small hole into that, each horseshoe crab will get a small plastic disc tag, and they each have their own unique number, and there's like a screw-like back to them. And so you'll just kind of like pop the tag in, and then it stays on, and we record data about their sex. So we want to know, if they're a male or a female, if there's any injuries, maybe there's some cool stuff growing on them, like barnacles or slipper shells, and we'll note that. And then also the date and the beach. And so all of this data is collected, and it helps us have a better understanding of our restoration efforts and, beach selection for horseshoe crabs. As we move forward with our restoration work, we want to make sure that we're focusing on beaches that are going to be utilized by horseshoe crabs, and we want to gauge the success of that through our tagging data. But that data also helps to inform management decisions about horseshoe crabs, some information about their population, mortality, and movement throughout the bay, not only during the spawning season, but also between seasons.
We've talked about like their migration and up onto the beach, but I heard that we don't really know how they choose their sand, or like tell us a little bit about the eggs and the breeding on the beach and how that'll work. So that's pretty unusual for a sea creature to, like a non-mammalian sea creature or non-turtle sea creature to breed on the beach, isn't it?
It is, yeah. So, horseshoe crabs, they come up onto the beaches during the high tides to spawn and lay eggs. And in New Jersey, we have 2 high tides a day. We have one during the day, one in the evening. And the peak of horseshoe crab spawning can be found around the new and the full moons during the evening high tides. And that's because of the water level that comes up on the beach. So during those tides around the moon, we have higher water up on the beach. And, one of the site selection criteria for horseshoe crabs is the sand needs to be pretty porous and well oxygenated. So those eggs have to get kind of enough water so that they don't dry out, but not too much water because they don't want the eggs to become inundated with water either. As far as beach selection, there's still a little bit of a, kind of like a mystery about exactly what beaches they select, but they tend to like these shallow sloped beaches and bays that are, it's calmer water there. It's a little bit protected from wave energy. It's easier for them to come up on these shallow sloped beaches. But, one of the cool things about horseshoe crabs, especially Limulus polyphemus, is they have this estuary fidelity. So, some beach laying animals have beach fidelity, like sea turtles, right? So they go back to the same beach every year. Horseshoe crabs have estuary fidelity. So all of the horseshoe crabs that spawn and lay eggs in Delaware Bay tend to return back to Delaware Bay every year to spawn and lay eggs again. And we've been able to see that through our tagging data as well.
Wow, that's amazing. I love that they move like 150 kilometers out to sea to the shelf, and then they're like, I'm going to go back to the exact river. I just think animals just know so much more about migration and directions than humans ever will. I think it's pretty cool.
Absolutely, yeah.
So what do horseshoe crabs eat? Talk us through, like, when they're not coming up onto the beach and laying their eggs, what are they eating? And what's, like, the day of a horseshoe crab like?
So the day of the horseshoe crab, it'll kind of depend on the time of year. So during the spawning season, the horseshoe crabs, so the males, when it's about high tide and they're getting ready to spawn, they'll just kind of hang out in the intertidal area until the females approach the beach. And as the female approaches the beach, she'll send out pheromones that she's in the area, ready to spawn and lay eggs. And so that's when the male attaches to her. So really the males are just kind of like waiting around until the females are ready to lay eggs. And so when they're not up on the beach spawning and laying eggs, if it's still during spawning season, they hang just offshore. They really don't go too far. And they spend that time just kind of resting. They'll eat like small bivalves, worms. They live on the bottom of the bay and seafloor, so they just eat things that you find on the bottom of the bay and seafloor. And then they just wait until the next high tide. And when they're not up spawning, they're either making their trek back out to the continental shelf or just hanging out there until it's time for them to come back. They don't live a very exciting life.
Oh, sorry, I just have to ask, do they burrow when they're laying their eggs and they come onto the beach? Are they digging a burrow? Or are they just putting them out there? Like, how does that work?
Yeah, so the female, she will bury herself down in the sand quite a bit. The eggs, she'll try and bury them. It's like between 5 and 20 centimeters below the sand. So the males, they clasp onto the back of her, and then there's a few that just surround her for all kind of external fertilization. But yeah, she's buried a little bit into the sand, and then those eggs, in order for them to hatch, they have to stay buried. And so it takes about 2 weeks for them to become fully developed before they hatch. But when we have like rough waters, especially when we have coastal storms, it tends to churn up that sand a bit and unearths some of those eggs.
And so with the changing climate and so forth, is that kind of a concern that changing weather and, as we talked about earlier, changing temperature will bring about issues for these amazing animals?
Absolutely. Yeah. So it's kind of hard to talk about horseshoe crabs without also talking about shorebirds, especially the red knot. So, we have this incredible migratory shorebird, the red knot, that flies from as far as the tip of South America up to the Delaware Bay. And it spends like 3 weeks eating horseshoe crab eggs. And so there's this really great relationship between these two species where the red knots depend on horseshoe crab eggs. They're really fatty. It's a quick way for them to get as much energy as possible to then sustain their journey up to the Canadian Arctic, where they will breed. And so what we have been finding over the last several years is that this 3-week window has become like really narrow recently. And I think a lot of that is due to climate change. So, horseshoe crabs are temperature dependent. They rely on the change in the temperature for them to come up to spawn and lay eggs. And, a couple of years ago, we had a coastal storm that hit in the beginning of May, just as the horseshoe crabs were getting ready to spawn. And so when we have storms like that, they tend to hang offshore a bit and they won't come up. And then the red knots showed up and there were no horseshoe crabs. And the birds don't know if, they're still waiting on the horseshoe crabs or if they missed them. So the birds left. And a lot of them didn't make it up to the Canadian Arctic to breed. And we saw those numbers kind of plummet after that season. And, when we start to have more mild winters, we're starting to see some of the spawning happening more in early April. And this 3-week window that the birds have is just going to become more narrow. And the birds aren't the only ones that rely on these eggs either. There's a lot of finfish and other bird species too that feed on horseshoe crab eggs.
Yeah, it's a really interesting one because I find with a lot of marine life, it's not just one issue that's causing like a big decline, or climate change is one symptom, like microplastics and overfishing. And I know those issues can affect the crabs, but it feels like climate change is the main one that's affecting these birds. Like it's not like we can do something else to help them. It's just purely climate change, isn't it?
Well, so climate change is, that's definitely something that affects the birds. But, as far as the horseshoe crab population, there are other measures that can be taken to protect them. Horseshoe crabs are harvested for bait, and they're used as bait in the whelk and eel industry. They're also harvested for their blood. So one cool thing about horseshoe crabs is they have this component in their blood that clots or coagulates anytime it comes in contact with bacteria. And so the lysate that's developed from horseshoe crab blood is used in the pharmaceutical and biomedical industries. And that's used to test, vaccines, injectable drugs, medical devices. And that really puts a burden on the horseshoe crab population as well. And, that's not just the Atlantic horseshoe crab either. There's, a couple other species that are in Asia that are also bled for medical purposes, although it's a different test that's used, but they're also, harvested for bait. Loss of habitat is also a really big, threat for horseshoe crabs. The more that we develop our shoreline and coast, the less habitat they have to spawn and lay eggs.
Yeah, because how far up the beach are they coming?
Not too far up, just as far up as the high tide goes. But, as we develop our shorelines and place bulkheads and jetties, that cuts off access for critical horseshoe crab spawning habitat.
Yeah. Well, to bring it back up to a high note, because I hate getting towards the end of the show and being a bit doom and gloom, although it is serious. I want to just ask, have you had any cool encounters with horseshoe crabs? Or is there a moment where you're like, wow, That's a really weird behavior, or like, you know what I mean, like a special horseshoe crab experience.
So I've been working with horseshoe crabs for the last 9 years, and I've tagged over 30,000 crabs with the help of volunteers at this point. But I think the coolest horseshoe crab experience I've ever had was a few years back. We had to cancel a volunteer night because of a really severe thunderstorm that was coming through. But it was like the peak of horseshoe crab spawning for us in New Jersey. And so my coworker and I, made the decision that maybe wasn't the wisest to like go out to the beach and see the horseshoe crabs. And, there was a lot of coastal flooding. So we had to park like way up the road, and we were walking out in like knee deep water. And we got to the beach, and it was the most horseshoe crabs I've ever seen in my life. And it was the coolest thing. There were just like hundreds of thousands of horseshoe crabs. And, we've had a severe decline in horseshoe crab population in New Jersey and along the Atlantic coast in the last few decades. But what I saw out on the beach that night is like what I picture when people talk about like mountains of horseshoe crabs on beaches back in the late 80s. That's what it felt like. It was just so cool to see that.
Wow. It's crazy. And it's crazy for people who don't live near these animals, because they're not related to anything else, are they really? Like, they're pretty unique.
They're really unique. Yeah, they're maybe closely related to spiders and scorpions, but it's a pretty far stretch for that. They're kind of their own thing.
Now, do you have any, we've spoken about so many kind of cool facts, but do you have any additional ones on top of like how crazy their blood is and how they lay eggs on the beach and all that kind of stuff? Is there any other cool facts?
I have lots of cool facts about horseshoe crabs. So, I talked a little bit about horseshoe crab blood and the really cool component that like makes it clot. But something else that's really cool is they have this like beautiful like sky blue blood, and their blood is blue because it's copper based, unlike our blood, which is iron based. So that's always really cool to tell people that come out with us, that they have blue blood. I think, another really cool thing about horseshoe crabs is that when the female comes up to lay eggs for the season, she will have pretty much all of the eggs that she's going to lay that season inside of her. And she keeps them all in her prosoma, which is the front portion of the horseshoe crab. And so she'll lay up to like 90,000 within one season, and she'll have all of them inside of her ready to go. And I just find that fascinating. And then she'll lay about 4,000 at a time. And so one of the things that, we're also trying to collect with our data is kind of when the females come up to spawn and lay eggs. So she lays about 4,000 at a time, and she comes up about 20 times in the season. But we want to know a little bit more about when she comes up. Is she only coming up during one of the high tides a day, or is she coming up for a few high tides at a time and then she goes to rest? And so that's something else that we're going to try and collect with our tagging data as well.
Cool. Yeah, so I guess, is she doing that because she can have different partners, so she has a better chance of her eggs surviving? Or is it just to, try and avoid the shorebirds? Or why do you think she doesn't lay them all in one go?
I imagine it's just exhausting. I don't know, maybe she has to, take a couple of days to recuperate and get some energy back before she goes back to, spawn and lay eggs a few days later. But yeah, we want to get a little bit more information about the timing of when the females come up during the season to lay her eggs.
Apart from people, are there any predators of them when they come up to lay their eggs on the beach?
So not so much. They have outlived most of their predators. When they're juveniles, there are some fish and birds and crab species that tend to eat them. And as adult horseshoe crabs, sometimes sea turtles or sharks will eat them if there's nothing else around, but they've outlived pretty much all of their predators.
Cool. So if people want to see horseshoe crabs, or they want to help out horseshoe crabs in any way, what's the best way for them to do it? And where should they go and what should they do?
So if you would like to see horseshoe crabs, especially the Atlantic horseshoe crab, the epicenter of horseshoe crab spawning in the world is Delaware Bay. So, that's a great place to come see them. They're up during high tides in May and June. And the peak of that is usually around the new and the full moon, the evening high tide. And if you want to help horseshoe crabs, often we see horseshoe crabs up on their back on the beach. The best way to help them is just flip them back over. And when you do that, we just ask that you flip them over by their side. A lot of people tend to pick up horseshoe crabs by their tail, but their tail is actually very fragile. And the muscle that holds their tail is very fragile. And so if any part of that tail breaks, they're not going to be able to right themselves on their own. So the easiest way to help a horseshoe crab is just flip them back over.
Sorry, I love that, that's something that we should be encouraging people. If you find an upside down horseshoe crab, just flip it over by its shell, not by its tail, and off it goes. It's just cool. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Oh, yeah, no. So, we run a pretty extensive volunteer program for horseshoe crab tagging, and, we're always welcoming new volunteers. So, feel free to check us out and come tag horseshoe crabs with us.
Awesome. Cool. Well, that kind of brings us to the end of the episode. But if anyone wants to learn more about horseshoe crabs or the work you do, where should they go?
So if you'd like to learn a little bit more about the Littoral Society and our work, the best way you can find us is at Littoral Society on all of our social media channels. And that's LITTORAL Society. Check out our website, littoralsociety.org. Sign up for our newsletters. Become a member. We encourage people to become members of the Littoral Society and, get more involved in our work, help us advocate for coastal issues, help us advocate for horseshoe crabs.
Awesome. Well, thanks heaps for being on the show.
Thanks so much for having me, Matt.
Seacreatures Podcast is hosted, edited, and produced by Matt Testoni. You can see my photography on Instagram at matt_testoni_photography or visit my website, www.mtunderwatermedia.com. If you've liked the show, jump onto our Patreon account, which is www.patreon.com/seacreaturespodcast, where you can help with a little monthly donation, which helps with the running costs of the show. Music by the awesome Dan Musil, and production assistance by George McHerron. If you like the show, please give us a rating wherever you're listening to. If it's Spotify, if it's Apple, anywhere, every extra rating helps. Coming up next time on the Seacreatures Podcast, we're going to be talking all about the Sydney octopus with Lawrence Shield. This has been the Seacreatures Podcast. Over and out.